Welcome to the Love Mondays podcast. My goal is to bring inspiring and authentic guests on the show who can help everyone love their Mondays and be truly excited and intentional about the life they're living every single day. In this world where many people do not love what they do and are enduring their jobs or professions, I really believe there's a unique and fulfilling path for everyone. I have three amazing guests today. I call them the three coffee bosses: Christine Cruz-Clarke, Lisa Richardson, and Samantha Taylor. And I'd love them to share their stories, including how they were able to rise to the top of their respective organizations. What are some common approaches as well as different approaches? I'm going to start with Christine Cruz-Clarke. She's the CEO of Balzac's Coffee Roasters, a board member of FHCP, Ascend Canada, Coffee Association of Canada, and Bayview Glen. Definitely a record number of boards for my guests. She was previously the GM at TerraCycle and spent 8 years at Mars, including a stint in the UK, and also has experience at Hershey's, Kraft, and Deloitte. Next, Lisa Richardson. She's the Executive Vice President and COO at Canterbury Coffee, based in beautiful Vancouver, BC. She was previously the National Director of Sales at Food Service at Earth's Own and spent 13 years at Kraft, where our paths crossed. And last but not least, Samantha Taylor, who's the president of 49th Parallel Coffee Roasters, also in Vancouver, BC. She spent 3 years at Vega, with her last role being the VP of Marketing and E-commerce, and spent 15 years at Kraft Canada, where again, our paths were crossed. All these amazing individuals inspire me on so many levels. So welcome once again. So simple but profound question. And I'm going to start with Samantha on this. So I really want people to start loving their Mondays more. What advice would you give people who maybe are not looking forward to that alarm on Monday morning?
Well, that is a big question, Ron, and I could go on and on with many, many words of wisdom. But I do think, from a career perspective, it's definitely a long game, right? So focusing on things you love, being curious, exploring different functions, businesses along the way will give you that ability to figure out what really gives energy. And that's where the true passion and that ability to work through challenges really comes into play. So, and look for something that really gives you energy.
Thank you. Lisa, what would you add to that?
At the end of the day, to be healthy and present sounds a bit Pollyanna, but that's really the most important thing, that you show up being positive, healthy, etc. I think we're in the people business. And what inspires me on Mondays is sort of this reinvigoration. I get to be back with my community. I get to be back inspiring and being inspired by people. And it's a fresh start every week. I have sort of an innate passion, I think, within me. And my family is a really important piece too. My family and friends who recharge me, every night of the week and including on the weekends. So you combine that and having that settlement behind me with the excitement of being with my community and my people, starting fresh on a Monday, really inspires me. And so I don't think I've ever not looked forward to Monday.
That's awesome. Christine, what about you?
I think in keeping with what Lisa mentioned about being a little bit Pollyanna about it, I think life is short. And if you can figure out what you love to do and find a way of making a living doing that, it really is as simple as that. It's like figuring out your ikigai, which is that intersection between all of the things that it really takes to make you happy, but also as a service that the world needs.
Yeah, and I like those answers, and it started with Samantha talking about being curious and exploring and the long game. I really like that about not just jumping into something and then recharging every Monday and the importance of family and whatever recharges you to be invigorated and excited about Mondays. And then Christine, I think, was a nice tag just to say the same thing, right around, hey, how do we find our passion? Life is short. And there's so many different lessons in there. I really want to use this episode to inspire women and men and really help them achieve their dreams. But it is a unique opportunity to see three women at the top of their organizational charts. And I really want to dive a little bit deeper into how that transpired for each of you. So let's start with career goals, right? So Lisa, did you always aspire to lead an organization?
I may have a little bit of a different take on this. Actually, Christine, Samantha, and Ron, I think you do know, how I ended up in this role that I'm in today. And it was not a career path. I did not sit down and set a strategy and a set of goals, a strategy to get where I am today. It was really, for me, a little bit about the journey. It was about finding a job and people. As I say, I will always go back, we're in the people business. That's first and foremost, right? And if I was working with people, if I was in challenging roles, if there was change constant, because I love change, felt inspired, I was actually really good where I was. Because for me, my career goal was really being there to mentor and coach. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get further along in the podcast, but that is what really drove me. And if I could make a difference for somebody else in their career goals and make them reach those career goals, that was really what drove satisfaction for me. So a bit of a different twist. We can talk about goals and how you set those up and how do you become very prescriptive to get there. And certainly there is a formula, I think, out there for many. But for me personally, that was not my prescription, so to speak. If that makes any sense?
Yeah, thank you. Christine, what about you?
I think the similarity in our answers is that I'm going to start with a no. So as I think about your question in terms of did I envision myself getting to this role? Not exactly. I think when you start a corporate career, the typical path really begins with a functional area of focus. And in my case, that was marketing. And as I progressed within an organization and moved from one marketing role to the senior one, and then from one organization to the next, leading kind of larger teams and larger scopes of business along the way, and then eventually taking that and moving it across the pond to learn what it's like to lead a portfolio of brands in a larger team in another market. It really just came to the point where I needed growth beyond that functional mastery. And that's really what started that path towards organizational leadership, taking me to where I am today.
So 2 no's so far. Samantha, are you going to break the streak here?
The answer is no. But I do think there's some common themes here. I love hearing the stories from everyone, and really this idea of loving to lead, loving a challenge, and this idea of continually learning, right? So you kind of get to a role, you really want to conquer it, do a really fantastic job, and that really brings that next opportunity. And, as Christine talked about, you move your way through different roles and potentially different organizations, and eventually you get to a point where that next challenge and role turns out to be leading a broader team. So there's definitely some consistencies along the way, this idea of loving to lead, loving solving problems and a challenge, and then really loving working with people and seeing them grow as well through all of that. And you can sort of work on mastering that throughout your career. I think this is a great spot where the door opens up and you can really explore leading an organization.
It's really interesting. So 3 no's, but very similar answers, and just taking every role and loving it, being curious, exploring it. Interestingly enough, what Lisa said and what you both echoed, and loving change is not what most people would say, right? So it's really interesting to say that journey, and maybe reframing change to say, look, there's better things to come, even though it's hard. And I have a feeling you all jump out of your comfort zones quite a bit to start getting there, right? And once you get to mastery, what's next? And having a love for that change. So really, really like that. So let's move on to mentorship and coaching, right? And I'm a big believer in that. Samantha, I want to start with you to say, do you have a mentor or coach who has helped you along the way?
The importance of mentors and coaches along the way, I can't emphasize that enough, right? These are the people that help you maybe work through some learnings or give you context that you wouldn't necessarily have. So absolutely the importance of mentors and coaches, so important. The right person at the right time is also really important. So, have I had one mentor along the way? Absolutely not. And I think, that right fit with those mentors is super important. And it's just that type of relationship really help you kind of clear the fog, if you will, in terms of what's important for you to build and develop your skill sets.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, we both worked with a gentleman named Dan Delisandro, right? Very amazing leader, very unique style. Do you want to talk maybe a little bit about what you learned from him? I'd love to get into some specific examples. Anything come to mind around a mentorship moment with Dan?
It's funny you say this, Ron, because I went through some examples of mentors in my mind, and Dan really came up for me as somebody who taught me a number of different lessons. And there's probably 2 of them that are the most important ones that I learned from many. And the first one was the importance of team, and not just a team that comes together in meetings and does work, but a team that plays together, does things outside of work, and really develops those relationships. And that creates sort of the secret sauce in terms of what a high performing team looks like. So that was really the first thing. And you've been there, Ron, through some of the experiences with Dan. And then I would also say, direct feedback. So, there's a book out right now, fairly current. It's called Radical Candor, right? Well, I feel like Dan was the original radical candor who really gave me feedback, like direct between the eye feedback that was not always good, but he did it in a way that kind and so clear that it really helped me grow and develop in those areas where I needed it. So really high impact that he had on me in my career. And I could probably go on and on, but I won't.
Yeah, we'll at some point we'll do the Dan Delisandro show. But for me, I just want to echo what you said, because I was, pretty shy finance person, comes into that role, and all of a sudden I'm recording music videos, and I didn't quite understand it, but now I do, right? And I think you said the secret sauce of bringing people together and being really, really authentic, right? Direct in your face. I absolutely love that. Christine, same thing. I want to ask the same question to you. And if you could specify a mentor, I love getting into specific stories like that.
Yeah, for me, I've had a lot of different mentors over time, lots of similarities to what Sam said. And I would like to consider them almost like having a personal board of directors that really just shifts over time. And the benefit of really having almost like this composition of coaches, mentors, and sponsors throughout my career has really made a difference. And one of the questions I often get asked is, what's the difference between each one of those different types of roles in your life? And the way I like to think of it is, a coach is someone that really talks with you, a mentor is someone that likes to talk to you, and then a sponsor is someone who can talk about you. And coaches are really those individuals that help you ask those powerful questions that really help to enhance your own self-awareness about what your gaps might be, or just anything that you're really talking about. A mentor is someone that can share their lived experiences with you and give you kind of the benefit of what they've lived through, how they've gotten through certain circumstances, etc. And then sponsors are those individuals that can really advocate for you when you're not in the room. And having a little bit of each and having the right person at the right time can really help to propel your career forward, particularly as women leaders. As I think back to the different mentors that I've had, I know there was one in particular when I was abroad, and the piece of advice that he gave me that really stuck with me is the importance of always betting on yourself. And it's this concept of playing to win, not playing not to lose. And when you play to win, you're really focused on maximizing your strengths and really bringing your best self forward, versus focusing on not failing. And when you're doubling down on your strengths, you really are able to be far more.
Yeah, no, I really like that concept of a personal board of directors with, coaches and mentors and sponsors, and really being very intentional. And, probably an extension of that question, which is probably asking the right people at the right time. And Samantha touched on that as well. So Lisa, what about you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with both the gals, but I think, just circling back to what Sam was saying about collaboration and communication is so important, right? And I think those were teachings that were sort of ongoing, same as we're all speaking about. We've had a variety of coaches, mentors, sponsors, and I love how you define those differences, Christine, over, my 25, 30-year career. And so you learn from different people, different things at different times, depending on where you are at in your career. I will speak to one person that I think probably stands out more, and it's a gentleman by the name of Lou Canary. And Ron, you've worked with Lou. Sam, you probably know him as well. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. But I did take over from him a role that I took over at Kraft while he was he was retiring. And I think he really inspired me probably the most because I was a later in my career. He was inspiring because it was about self-development. It was about all of these things that we talk about, and we can lay out, we can talk about trust and authenticity and honesty and transparency. But for him, it was really about the journey, and it was about having fun, and it was about giving back. And I'll tell you, sometimes we can take ourselves so incredibly seriously, and we give ourselves a really hard time along the way. And I think it's really hard for us to get out of that. And that's a lot of pressure, right, for people. So he came along at the perfect time in my career. And, I actually, to this day, when he was departing, I kept his 7 words of wisdom, and they are on my bulletin board. on his craft letterhead to this day. They were really simple, really, really simple. And they resonate with me every day. His words of wisdom were: have confidence, rely on your experiences and special skills, leverage your personality, make your mark, call BS as appropriate. You make the call, push if it's important to you, give ownership, but demand accountability. Dig in, help out, volunteer your services, and maintain your energy, and let's just have fun.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And I had the pleasure again of I'd go out to offsite meetings when I was in finance, and they didn't really want me out there for the most part, but Lou would always welcome me, and he'd realize, hey, I was handing out the money. So the way he would treat me, and it was just a fantastic individual. And at least I actually saw you show some of his mannerisms as you answered that question. He had this famous shoulder shake, whatever it is. But I think one theme that I really like is, all three are probably leaving your mark on your respective organizations. And it is about the people, right? It's coming through in all your answers all the time. And how do you help people along the way? How do people help you along the way as you go through that journey? So really cool to see like a lot of commonality about the approach and even how you're answering that question. So let me zero in on advice to women who aspire to be the corner office. So unfortunately, you all said no. So this was not an intentional plan, but I actually do like that fact and the fact that you chose to embrace every role. So anything else you'd add to that very specific question and maybe tagging on to what Christine was saying, playing to win, believing on yourself. So Sam, I'll start with you and just would love just top of mind thoughts on that.
The first one is leaning into your strengths. So oftentimes, professional development focuses on misses, or sometimes they're called opportunities. But this idea of really honing in on what you're good at. And obviously nobody's perfect, right? So I think playing to strengths is a really important piece of that. Really understanding what the people around you and what the team need to accomplish, setting a clear vision for that team and getting out of the way when they need you to get out of their way, and being there right beside them as a coach or a player coach when they need that. So those are a couple of them, top of mind to me as it relates to really making your way to that position.
Yeah, I like that. And so focus on your strengths for sure. But do you still say, hey, I need to work on my development needs, or are you pretty much, hey, I want to focus on those strengths? Like, how do you approach that question?
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of things, around weaknesses, opportunities. We're always going to have them, and they're going to change along the way, right? Different roles demand different, skills, things like that. So really understanding what those weaknesses are. Obviously, if they're career stallers or they're going to get in the way of you being successful, they have to be a focus, right? But this idea of spending, 80% of your development time constantly on this notion that, you're not good enough at this or you need to work on this, just from a mindset standpoint, isn't necessarily what will help you. I love Christine saying playing to win, right? You play to win. There's great sports analogies there. Different players play different positions in different times of their careers because of the strengths that they bring, and it can't move throughout the field, if you will. But really understanding where you can double down on that strength, I think, is an important piece.
Let's go to Lisa next. Same question.
Well, I agree with Sam wholeheartedly. I think that it is important just to go back on development. I think, we're all lifelong learners, right? So I think investing in yourself and the time, if you're aspiring to get to that corner office, that is what you do. Sam touched on having a clear vision and having some strategies to get there. So that can work, and that can work for many. I think it's important for women to advocate for themselves, right? I don't think it should make a difference. I'll just circle back to that. I think that it shouldn't matter, and we shouldn't have to just focus on for women. It should be for anybody, but this is what we're talking about today. But I think those are a couple of critical things to think about as well for women who do aspire for the corner office.
Perfect. Thank you. Christine, what about you?
I think very much builds on both what Lisa and Samantha have been sharing. It's that idea of making the time to invest in your own learning. And in particular, if the corner office is what you're aspiring to, understanding what are the experiences and critical experiences in particular that you need in order to get there. And the development framework that I really like is split into a 70-20-10, whereby 70% of your learning is really focused on the things that you have the opportunity to lean into on a daily basis. basis? How can you continue to develop, learn, and kind of close your gaps through the things that are demanded of you on a daily basis? The 20% is the learning that you take from others. Who is within your immediate network? Who can you learn from, be it line managers or other peers even, to really continue to help bring the perspective that you need in service of your own learning? And then finally, the 10% is structured learning. So whether it's courses that you're enrolling in, listening to podcasts like this one, anything that you're reading, what are some of those more structured ways that can continue to push your own self-development?
Yeah, no, I think it's super helpful to have those frameworks, right? To say most of the learning's on the job and experiences, but how do you supplement that with the 10% to round out that learning? So I want to circle back, Lisa. I think it was an important point about, hey, it's for everybody. But I also know, for example, I chair a CEO group and it's 10 men and 2 women, right? So right now, the ratio doesn't match society, so I do want to zero in a little bit more on that to say, do you feel there's gaps? For instance, maybe the belief isn't quite there. Where are the gaps to maybe bring that ratio closer to what you see in society?
Personally, I don't believe I've actually felt it. I've never identified it. Personally, I'm not denying that it does exist, okay? By virtue of some of the facts and data that we see out there. You look at the engineering field, there's probably 2% women in engineering. Why is that the case? I will say, and I can probably speak to these gals as well, on my leadership team, we lean towards have a higher percentage of women, right? So our demographic within our organization is we lean towards a higher percentage of women, actually throughout all functions, which is kind of interesting. Was it purposeful? Maybe subconscious, for sure. But, we hired the best candidates, quite frankly. We didn't set out and say, hey, I want a female, over here. So I do think it exists. What can we do about it? I think bringing awareness and attention. I think times are changing and we're starting to see that shift. Probably just not as fast as we would like to see that shift.
Samantha, Christine, anyone else?
I'm happy to jump in. I think there's a couple of things I can build on with that. I think the definition of leaders and leadership has evolved over time. So you kind of think back even to, 70 years ago, which sounds like a time ago, but that whole idea that leaders were command and control, right? I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it. And that's how we're going to roll. That's evolved over time to, a more collaborative approach. So the definition of leadership has changed, and I think the role models out there over time have needed to change in order for women to even think that it's possible. And I don't know if it's true or not. We can probably, ask ourselves a question of, did you have any female role models in your life that were leaders of some kind? I don't mean like companies, but leaders of some kind. And if I think back, the answer to that is absolutely yes for me. And I think that helped me even see that this was possible and that there were different types of leadership. So that's, I think, a really kind of big piece of it. And I'll comment as well. Lisa, you mentioned your leadership team. So mine's similar. I am, I'm quite focused on making sure that we have a balanced team representation as best as we can across many different facets. But my team does skew a little bit female, and part of that is I find females are interested in working with me because it's an opportunity for them to work directly with a female role model in this way where they can learn and aspire. And so it's almost a bit of a magnet. And we hear this and read about this, but I feel like the teams almost find me in some respects, really want to work with a female leader. So I think that's been interesting and really insightful to see from a different angle in this role, to see that happening versus what I experienced, which was working primarily for men throughout my career. So
awesome. Thanks for sharing. Christine.
Yeah, I think lots of similarities here. And as I really think about even just this podcast in particular, representation matters, right? You can't be what you can't see. And that very much leads to the whole, magnet that Samantha was even referring to. And it's that idea that the more that we continue to normalize women in leadership positions, the more that you will see over time. And similar to, it sounds like the leadership teams that both Lisa and Samantha lead, mine's actually a very similar composition as well. Up to 5 people on my leadership team, 3 are female, including myself. And when I look across my broader organization, 68% of my total organization is actually female. And we have a big representation when it comes to diversity and inclusion in all of its forms, just peppered throughout the entire company. And I know coffee is what kind of brings us all together. The fun fact that I always think is quite interesting in coffee is that when you look on coffee farms themselves, upwards of about 70% of coffee is typically harvested by women. But then that number really starts to dwindle when you get into those leadership positions. So it is a bit of an interesting thing that you've got 3 coffee bosses on the podcast itself, but it isn't the norm. But we are all kind of working in our own ways and in our own communities to change that.
Yeah, no, I think I like all your answers there. And I think it is a little bit about belief, right? So I had a previous guest, her name was Michelle Coutinho, and she was behaving as a principal, but it took somebody else to point that out to her. So she didn't even see it, and it was kind of right in front of her. And it was a cool story to see that she was acting that way, but she didn't see it. And I think I connect that answer to what all 3 of you coffee bosses are doing. You're showing people it is possible. And I do want to circle back to Lisa's point. It is about the best person for the job, right? So it really comes down to this, but I think it's around every individual believing it is possible. And then they have to go back to what you all first said. Hey, you do a great job in every single experience. And then it's about that best person for the job. So I really like all those answers. Thanks for sharing. So pressure. So at the top of the organization, the pressure is always on, right? And I'd love to hear how you handle that pressure. What are some strategies to manage and thrive in that pressure-filled environment? So Christine, I'm going to start with you.
I think bringing perspective from the different roles that have really helped you move into the leadership position that you're in, but then also managing resilience. It's those 2 that really matter quite significantly when it comes to being in a leadership position. And yes, there's pressure in the role, but at the end of the day, we're in the business of serving coffee, which typically is a pretty positive aspect in any Wednesday. So the funny thing is that really simple reminder actually makes quite a difference in your mindset, and it alleviates a lot of the pressure that we tend to put on ourselves, whether it's me or anyone else in the team. And having that strong team, having the leadership network, personal board of directors that we alluded to earlier, those are all different resources that you can lean on to alleviate the pressure, so that you really do realize that it's not just on you. Anything great happens because of the results of the team coming together.
Awesome. I love that. Lisa, what would you add to that?
It is tough. It is tough, and it can be a pressure cooker for sure. I think a couple of things. We have to be a little bit more gentle on ourselves sometimes, right? And we do need to find friends. I don't want to say mentors and sponsors in this particular environment, but I'll cite Christine and Samantha. Christine, I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. Samantha more recently. And having contacts, friends, associates that are in the similar business, I find actually wonderful that I could potentially reach out to them and we can chat about some of the challenges. Now, we work for different coffee companies, absolutely, but we can certainly help and assist each other navigating through some of the similar challenges that we're faced with. And that, I think, has really helped me. Having people within my environment, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a friend, family friend, it doesn't matter, to bounce things off of is really important, just to be able to stay a little bit grounded. But I think it is really important for people to not be too hard on themselves, right? And have those check-ins.
I think this idea of a support network is critical. So who are your people? So as you are more junior in your career, often those are your peers, right? You can walk down the hall and be like, oh, I got this thing, I need some help. And that tends to narrow as you work your way up in an organization. And then when you sit, in a job like our jobs, there isn't an appropriate way to have that conversation inside the company, right? Given the role you play. So really focusing on how you can build that support network. And that can be your family, that can be friends, professional network. I work with a forum of people, of other executives that I go to regularly. We come together and it's an opportunity for us to share our challenges and learn from each other. So being really intentional about that support network versus kind of letting it be, I think is an important one. Focusing on what you can control, because boy, I would love for everything to be perfect all the time. And I know that is just realistic. So, knowing kind of when you need to let something go and you really need to dial in helps with that pressure, right? Because when you see all the things that are possible and all the things that can be done, you can almost, to Lisa's point, you need to be kind to yourself. You can almost make it a bit worse. And then I think this idea of compartmentalizing, just what are the things that I need to put in a drawer and put away for right now? Because if that idea of a positive mindset, and you can add stress to yourself, right? So what can I park for now, come back to, so that I can focus and be my best self in these moments where I'm most needed?
Yeah, no, there's so much amazing wisdom in there. I mean, it started with Christine saying we're just selling coffee. So sometimes we make it so complex, but pulling it back to, hey, how do we serve the customer, the consumer, things like that. And then Lisa talking about, let's not be too hard on ourselves. And I love the compartmentalization, Samantha, because there's a famous doorknob leadership, right? When you go from one physical meeting room or virtual to the next, how can you kind of almost shake that baggage from a really tough meeting or tough business results to maybe you're meeting with a new employee next and saying, look, I'm going to bring my best self and be very intentional and put that in a drawer. We're not going to forget about it, but we're not going to take that. And the best leaders to me have been able to do that, to say, okay, we're not solving world hunger here, selling coffee. And how do we get to the root of what we can control, which is, again, another very, very common answer. So balance, a little bit of a similar theme. What does balance mean to each of you? And I'll start with Lisa on this one.
The ever elusive balance, right? Everybody's striving for balance, work-life balance, home life. How do I deal with it all, right? And I think it's really tough, but we continue to strive. I'm still striving today. I'm 57 years old and I'm still looking for balance in my life. I think, though, back to what Samantha was saying, and you've reiterated, Ron, it is about compartmentalizing and taking a step back and saying, okay, what really can be accomplished today? Because it's going to be there tomorrow and the next day, and really providing yourself an opportunity to have perspective on things. Because when you are getting caught up in a challenge, it really is, you can go down a wormhole, right? And you really have to take yourself outside of that. I think the ever elusive balance becomes a little bit more of a reality as we start to grow and we are a little bit kinder to ourselves and nurture ourselves, right? And where we get inspiration from. And for me, it always comes back to my family, right? And work hard, play hard, all of those kinds of things. And you just learn, I think, to navigate how you can put things aside. Time for family, be present, I think is super important. I think, many people do go home and they take everything with them. And it's so important to not do that. And how do you build skills to be able to not do that so that when it's home time, it's home time? Presence is really important, right?
Yeah, no, I really like that because, and I've seen you in action where sometimes it will be a tough meeting, but you'll also call it out. Like you'll say at the beginning of the meeting, hey, it's a tough day, and just being really real as well. I've actually seen that live. And it really helps everybody in the physical or virtual room. Just okay. And I once led a meeting, it was facilitation, one of my first facilitations. And the CEO came and he said, I'm feeling really spicy today, right? I was like, oh shit, it's going to be a tough one. But it was very authentic, right? It was just like, okay, he was authentic and he called it out, right? So sometimes just being real is super helpful. Samantha, what would you add to balance? What's your definition there?
Feels like this perfect thing that people have put out there, like I'm going to find balance and I'll create the perfect week and the perfect support structure and then I will have balance. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to ebbs and flows. There are different stages of life, whether that's with your family, your kids, if you have kids, and the demands are going to shift over time. And so what balance looks like, in January in the winter when your kids are 5 and 6 versus June in the summer when they're 12 and 14, as an example, is going to look really different. So this idea of rolling with the changes, I think, is a really important one because there isn't a perfect formula for this. It's about, in this moment, how am I serving myself the best from a balance standpoint? And that could vary week by week. And then I think, Lisa, you talked about being present. It's so important that when you're there, certainly with, friends, family, that you're there. And it's very easy to carry, the backpack full of all the things that need to be done and those stressors, but being able to take that off when you walk in the front door and really be present is where that, I think that balance feels like it's more balanced, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Christine, what would you add?
I'm a big advocate for defining this for yourself. I know that especially in COVID, when everyone was trying to navigate different schedules and kids learning at home, different like napping schedules and all the kind of different circumstances that we encountered, we also tried to do a bit of a coordination effort, right? Like everyone's trying to coordinate, okay, these are the times that we're online, these are the times that we're not. And I think inevitably what it came down to was it is impossible to coordinate across everyone's different needs when it comes to balancing personal as well as kind of work demands. So for me, I've always been an advocate of you do you, and it really is as simple as that. And what that means is you know on a given week what you need to accomplish or what you want to accomplish, how much progress you need to make on something. The output is what matters. When you do it, it doesn't really matter whether it's 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. because you know how to adjust your schedule accordingly. And when you build that sense of foundation and trust across your teams and you trust them to get the work that needs to get done, it actually unlocks quite a lot. And I think the other piece to it too is it's not just about balancing those needs, but also balancing your own personal energy. And only you can decide kind of when you need to recharge. So if you do need to recharge, call it in a physical way during the day, maybe that's by taking your dogs for a walk or going for a walk yourself, then that's okay. That like you shouldn't feel confined to not have the ability to recharge if you need that for yourself. So it really is about understanding personal energy and then recharging, be it your kind of physical, emotional, mental, or even spiritual well-being accordingly in service of being able to be your best self at all times.
I do think that Christine's hit struck a little bit of a chord there, because I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge that we're all different human beings. So what recharges Christine and what she can accomplish in a day, or Samantha or myself, they're going to all be different. And I think today there's a lot of, especially with social media, there's a lot of opportunity for people to compare and look at output, whatever that may be. I don't want to try and define what output is. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, saying, am I doing as much as I can? It puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. Everybody has to remember we're all different human beings and we all have different thresholds of what we can do in a day, what we can accommodate. And I think that takes time, experience, to sometimes recognize that if some people ever do it all. And so we're navigating, very different times today. And again, we're in the people business, right? That is who we are. And we have to be as leaders, and we have to also teach others that they have to be patient and kind, right? Empathetic. And I think we, as females, we lean in that direction a little bit more.
Yeah, no, it's really refreshing to me. I mean, Samantha talked about the old autocratic leadership. That's kind of, to me, it's extinct. It doesn't work anymore. And it's really cool to see the level of depth you went into the answer. So even things like understanding your team's energy and your own energy at different parts of the day. Like I know for me, I was in the passport line at 6 a.m. today, really refreshed, doing some stuff, and I was super excited. But later tonight, I won't be that same person, right? And there's other people who are completely reversed. And so great leaders to me can recognize, okay, to use your words, do it when you can, just do a great job at it, right? I mean, that's the lens to do it. So I really like that. And you also talked about balance being very individual and different times of your life, right? And again, it's really thoughtful leadership. So I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure your organizations appreciate that as well. So mistakes, right? Or failures. And, I talk a lot about rebranding failures to move forward. So I'd love to start, Christine. Is there a failure or mistake that pops up in your memory that says, look, it was devastating at the time, but it led to great things? Is there any failure you want to talk about?
So thinking back to when I was working abroad, leading a marketing team in another market, in the UK specifically, I know one of the objectives that really we had in thinking about campaigns and things that we wanted to do with our brand, it's always about making sure that the brand is relevant at the time and then also for us, there's an aspiration to have our brains be integrated as part of culture. And what was really interesting is being a Canadian, I was very much a cultural outsider, and being presented with all of these ideas from agencies and all these discussions happening around all of these things that I literally had no idea what they were referring to, right? I didn't know the pop culture references. I didn't really know the jokes. And that moment for me was about, I'm completely failing at what I'm supposed to be doing right now in terms of giving you my opinion on whether or not this makes sense. It was very materially irrelevant, but a massive learning opportunity for me because it gave me a tremendous amount of empathy on what it's like to really be new to a country, be an outsider, and just feel that pressure to assimilate and just want to be part of everything.
No, I like that. And rebranding it to an opportunity to learn. Samantha, anything pop in your memory?
I certainly had an experience early on in my career as a brand manager, something that felt like a big fail in that moment, but was really something I'm grateful for having had the experience. And that was, I worked on a brand called Lunchables, if anyone remembers those. And it's probably like one of those age questions, right? Like you can figure out how old somebody is if they remember the Kraft Lunchables from Canada. So I worked on that business. As a brand manager, you're trying to grow in business. Well, we came upon an issue basically with respect to regulations. And we learned we had to exit business in, it was about 4 to 6 weeks. It was one of those crazy circumstances where you wouldn't write it, right? It just happens. And that moment felt like a real failure that we'd gotten ourselves into that position where we were really not making a decision. We had exit. We worked with a number of different partners. And I remember feeling kind of down in that moment, like I want to be a brand manager who's growing a business and building something and creating, not exiting. But it actually had to be one of a really great set of learning moments that I had in terms of how to do that. And that experience gave me a different lens that I could then take forward. So it is very cliche to say you do learn from all of these, whether they're mistakes or failures or moments where you're doing these things you don't think were supposed to be part of the job or the, really mandate you have. You truly do learn. I do think it takes distance to get to that point. Sometimes, depending on the magnitude of the issue or the failure, where you do need some time perspective to be able to really sit back and learn from that. Sometimes we're tough on ourselves, like, oh, I'm supposed to be learning in this moment. It doesn't feel good. And I think that's okay and that's natural, right? But over time, there's definitely a lot to take from these. So that was one that really still tugs the heartstrings for me in terms of an experience.
Nice, good memories of Lunchables. And it really kind of points to some of those opportunities or experiences that seem like, not the best experiences. If you have the right attitude, back to what you all said, can lead to massive opportunity, right? And one of my previous guests, Jim Alling, he talked about Coffee Mate, and it was that pretty much a dying brand within Nestle. And he talked about the power of a team, and it's now like a multi-billion-dollar brand. So the team came in and talked about it is possible. They played to win. And it kind of reminds me, your answer about those brands or opportunities that may not seem like an opportunity, with the right attitude can really turn things around. Lisa, what about you?
So I would call my example not necessarily a failure, but it was really uncomfortable. And there was a bit of fear associated with it. So Ron, I was actually with Kraft for 25 years, and I should have caught that earlier. So I was with Kraft for a long time. And I pretty much thought that I was going to play out my career there, to be very honest with you. Why wouldn't I? New opportunities, change constantly, buying, selling organizations, wonderful people that I worked with. So I was very much satisfied in what I was doing. And there came a time where a bigger change was going to be inevitable. And so that shift in my career, moving from a large, highly processed, wonderful organization, and moving into a smaller, independent, Canadian-based organization was pretty scary because I'd been conditioned one way, and that's what I knew. That's what I grew up with. That was really comfortable. Don't get me wrong. It was comfort, change, challenge along the way. So it was wonderful. And so I would say it was a bit frightening to get out of that kind of comfort zone because it was a big change for me. And so now I look back, on the last 6 years of those career changes and the 2 organizations that I've subsequently worked for, was probably the fastest learning curve that I've ever had. It was like hyperspeed change that I had to deal with. And boy, has that been fun. And that has been a wonderful ride. And so just overcoming that little bit of a fear, it was probably more than a little bit of a fear, to be honest, and realize how wonderful it is to thrive within an organization similar to what Christine, and Samantha are working for as well today. And so I feel so fortunate and so blessed that I've had that opportunity, because I can take all of my wonderful learnings that I had there and hopefully, impart much of that in these and make an impact on these 2 organizations that I work for and want to continue to make that impact. So again, I wouldn't say it's a failure, but certainly a big shift and a big change that can be a bit scary, a bit frightening.
Yeah, no, that thanks for sharing that, because I stayed 15 years at the same organization, Craft, and it was really hard those first 3 months or 6 months. And now I look back and it was the best thing ever, because my skills, like going into a small organization, I mean, you've all gone to smaller organizations and you understand the scope and, simple examples, like you have to get stuff done, right? And in a bigger organization, there's thousands of people doing stuff. So there's so many learnings on moving. And I want to pick up on that fear piece, right? Because I think that's another piece around jumping out of your comfort zone. And Samantha, I'd love you to talk, maybe start with why is it important, and what's your approach when these kind of fearful kind of changes come to light?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the growth in discomfort, it's something that's been talked about, studied a lot. And it is really true, though, when we talk about whether the failures or, moments where we've made big changes. I think, and it's connected to resilience, right? Learning how to work through that and come out of the other end better for it is definitely something that you can think about and read about, but is, I think, a lived experience. And so there is, it's that idea of that notion that stress can be really good. The right amount of stress in the right way can be good, because it does push ourselves. It's good for our bodies, right? That's what exercise is. And so thinking about that through the context of career, right? So when I put myself in experiences that are uncomfortable, you kind of get maybe not so dramatically into that sink or swim, but you really kind of do, right? And that's when you dig deep and you pull from those strengths that you have and you really focus and work on getting through that. It doesn't mean it's going to go smoothly, but when you come out of the other end of it, you really have strengthened yourself, right? Through those experiences. So I think that's what the value in failures is, or discomfort is. And I have countless examples of that. I mean, my 15 years at Craft, I think I had 13 roles, right? That's crazy. Like, does that math even work? Well, yeah. And you're continually put into this experience where you're like, I'm not the expert. I don't know everything. I can't fine tune this thing, in day one. So how am I going to learn it fast, bring results to the table, and know that I'm leaving it in a better place than when I walked in the door. It is a really powerful thing, and not to go on about it, but we talk about liking change, right? Christine's talked about it, Lisa's talked about it, and I think in some respects that's what change is, a moment of discomfort and growth, and then you repeat, and when it works well, it can be, borderline addictive. It feels good in the end.
Yeah, and even Lisa started with that, saying she loves change and reframing change and reframing stress, right? A certain level is good. I mean, we don't want to make it debilitating, but it's what's that right level to continue the growth. And one example that strikes me, I remember going into Samantha's office a couple of times, and she'd always be like very calm, and she'd say, "Ron, put it on a page," right? She had this thing just to say, stop for a second. Let's really understand the problem. And, I think it's a common thing I've seen across, you all do it in different ways. It's just, a calm approach. Let's try, what are we trying to solve, right? And let's step back and have a methodical approach combined with that reframing, I think is a magical combination. Christine, how do you deal with it?
I think there's just a lot of repetition here, right? Like, as I think about what we all have in common, it's the fact that we had the opportunity, particularly early on in our careers and throughout, to really be a bit agile when it comes to change. And it's when you're faced with almost like a change in role every 18 to 24 months pretty religiously, that really does kind of teach you a thing or two when it comes to your learning agility and your ability to figure out a situation relatively quickly in order for you to determine how you can best add value to that particular circumstance. So it's those skill sets that are really learned early on that have really been that thematic throughout all of our careers from the discussions that we've had today. I think it's that idea of really being able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and almost normalizing it to a degree, and then being able to reframe that discomfort as growth has just served all of us well. And I think that the other piece that I would add is not to discount the importance of the self-talk that happens as well. And it's that internal dialogue that we have with ourselves is something that can play quite a significant role in the way that we think about any particular circumstance. And having that positive, affirming self-talk helps to build confidence. It helps you get through those tough times, and it really helps you to shape what are those thoughts and emotions and leading into action in any particular situation that can be perceived as a bit of a fail in the moment, but something that you can really turn around based on the mindset that you bring.
So do you have a specific approach to transforming those automatic negative thoughts to positive? I mean, some people use meditation. Is there any specific practice you have to lean on those positive affirmations, so to speak?
So there isn't a specific one that I use, but I think over time, it's how do you always see the glass almost half full, as basic as that sounds, but it's making sure that you're constantly positive and you're constantly optimistic. And if there is something that's starting to go negative, how do you just talk your way out of it? Because you're constantly looking for the positive in any situation.
So do you show that, like, if you're having a tough day, Christine, like, do you show that, or are you trying to almost kind of, hey, deal with that yourself and bring a positive outlook? What's your style with that?
I lead with a lot of authenticity and transparency. And if it is a tough day, tough moment, it's inevitable that it's going to happen to all of us, right? It's never going to be all peachy and lovely. As much as that would be great, it's just not realistic. I think that we all work through those tough moments, but it's also, from a leadership standpoint, knowing when it's most appropriate to absorb some of that stress and when you need to enroll the help of others to get you through it. And it's being able to look across kind of the situation and understand what's the best thing as I serve my teams, what's the best way for me to show up.
Awesome. Samantha, Lisa, anything else from your perspective, any practices or any things that have worked for you in the past?
It's a really personal thing in terms of mindset. A couple things for me that I've used is giving myself the space to process things. So sometimes you want to have that answer immediately. And I've learned this from one of my coaches, this idea that, as a leader, sometimes we think we have to have the answer in that moment to everything. And when you're feeling that the stress is giving yourself space and time to recalibrate when something feels like this, right? Obviously, there are moments where you have to act very quickly, but giving yourself the space to turn that challenge into a more positive outcome in terms of what you might do about it. And then, I have, in the most challenging times, done that practice that, many have heard of, where at the end of the day, I write down 3 good things that happened. And it does help. You can retrain your brain, and it does help you, build a little bit of disciplines of recalibrating and seeing that positivity. So simple practice, small thing, and it does kind of fill the tank. Those 3 positive things at the end of the day.
Awesome. Lisa, anything on your side?
I agree wholeheartedly with what's been spoken about already, but I think, that self-talk and perspective for me, because there are many, many challenges in every day. And I'll refer back to, we're all humans. So, we too get sad or upset and, can cry. You wouldn't be human if you weren't, right? And so, but as a leader, you do need to know when you have to compartmentalize, right? But I think it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable. And we talk about being authentic and honest and transparent. And I think that's important for people to see, relatively speaking, and with some perspective on that. But I do think for myself, I am inherently a positive person. So I do lean to what is great. certainly get frustrated with what's not great, but I am really trying to, encourage people to be solution providers, because I don't have all the answers. That's why I have a team. They're there to support the organization. So I really try to encourage that and really lean on the positives of my team, because it's super easy to judge and go the negative, what somebody's not doing right, but nobody does everything right. So a lot of that is my self-talk and my perspective. If I'm having a bad day or something's going, sideways, I take a step back and go, what are all the great things that we've done and accomplished in the last couple of years? What are the great things we've accomplished in the last week? And really just trying to frame that up and provide perspective and manage expectations around that. And I do it to myself, and I try to share that with my team as well. In a whole host of, levels within the organization. And you hope that provides some comfort for yourself and for your team and your organization.
Yeah, no, I think all answers are around building confidence for yourself and belief for yourself and your teams, right? And that mindset that's come across this entire podcast of people first, glass half full when you can, but being authentic is really, really coming through. Okay, so last question. So what is the best piece of advice you've ever received and why? And Christine, I'll start with you.
I think I've had a number of mentors over time, and just going back to something I said earlier, it's the importance of always betting on yourself and playing to win. And it really is the idea that if you want to keep propelling yourself forward, propelling your career forward, you're the one that's in the best seat to do that. And how do you not just do it through your actions and the way you're continuing to lead and the impact that you're having and the value that you bring, but how do you also advocate for yourself as you find those ways to continue to grow your own career?
I was thinking about my friend Lou and sharing some of his words of wisdom, but I'm not going to repeat that. But I will share something else, and this was a leader that I highly respected throughout my career. And one thing that he used to emphasize, and Ron, you've probably heard this line, if your focus is everywhere, your momentum is nowhere. And I always do refer back to that quite often, just to provide this sense of focus, right? That you can't do everything. You can't do everything all the time, because you're really not going to do anything great. So really stop thinking in those terms and having blurred lines, and focus on one or two things that you know are going to be the most important and that you can act on. Whether that's personally or business-wise, I think it applies to both.
Awesome. Thank you. Samantha?
It's one that rings true for me, and I think it connects to some of the things we've talked about here. It's this idea that what got you here may not serve you moving forward in the same way, right? How we accomplish what we accomplish as individual contributors versus managers versus leaders along the way. So kind of approaching each situation with a fresh set of eyes, what can I bring to it and focus on, versus this is the way things always, and therefore I need to approach it that way. So it keeps it fresh, it keeps a new challenge interesting and dynamic, and knowing how to tap into those, past strengths and bring them forward, but really encouraging yourself to look at each situation with those fresh eyes and a fresh perspective.
Fantastic. Well, I've super enjoyed this podcast. I think the authenticity, the camaraderie has been fantastic, and I congratulate you. Amazing careers, and I love the fact that you all talked about your personal side as well, right? It's your balance as your individual, and keep inspiring people. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.